I'm going to go to the next step. So something gets announced, and I have heard there's two sides of the story. So a consolidator buys a distributor, and I've got a number of distributors who say, I hope that the consolidators buy a couple of my competitors because they screw them up and I get share, and they're all happy. That's side one. The other side, and Chris Blakesley talked about this yesterday from Annixter, when they've gone out and acquired distribution businesses. He said a lot of times we hear that these guys only sell on price and that they got to be selling in the garbage, and every time we go out and buy a company, it turns out their margin's better than ours and we're being outsold. So a lot of times a consolidator buys a company and they end up being stronger quicker, and other times it gets screwed up. What is the difference if I'm looking at this as being acquired or acquiring a company? How do I make sure that when I get that company, it kicks butt instead of sitting on its butt?
I would tell you everybody has a little different formula, right? And a lot of that depends on the model. So certainly in our world, there are some models that are a bit more centralized and there are some that are a bit more decentralized. I think the trick always is, and I think it's difficult for organization. I was intrigued about what Sandy said, and I agreed with him in terms of how people think. And one of the things you have to think about is the three-dimensional thinking process, hiring people that can do that, but then do you let them run? I would say the same is true about companies that acquire. I think it's a mistake, or we do, whereby we learn a lot from businesses that have come into our fold. And we try to take that and spread it in other places. So I wouldn't ever suggest that we have the right model in every way, shape, and form. But I do think that, when you have a new business come into an organization, if you're keen to learn rather than to tell, listen rather than to tell, there can be a lot of advantages to that. And in some cases, that probably slows us down. In other cases, though, we think that there's value creation from that. So I think there's a little common sense to it, right? I would never subscribe that we have all the answers. And we've seen that time, true, tested on more than one occasion.
My mother always said that common sense is actually a curse because you have to work with other people that don't have it. So, what do you see as the difference? You've been on both sides of that, Jim.
Well, I mean, you can spend an hour on this topic alone.
We don't have an hour.
I know,
fast.
But I have had clients tell me, hey, I am only going to sell my business to an entity that's going to take care of my people. I have had clients tell me, what I owe my people? Their last paycheck. So in terms of, the importance of what happens post-money transferring, it depends on the seller. And then on the buyer, you have, as Dave said, you have a ton of variables. You have, folks with a multi-decade, approach. You have folks with a 5-year approach. And then you have folks that are looking to hit their quarterly earnings. So how they operate and how they treat the people and the synergies on the, not so much on the sales side, but on the cost side, varies by buyer dramatically. And that goes back to the first question we always ask every owner is, what are you looking for? What do you want to accomplish at the end of this?
Because when you say that, it's more than just the number, the price, right? It's a big what are you looking for?
It's a big, everybody would like to get the highest price. All sellers would like to get the highest price, they can't. But what remains of the organization going forward, that's where it really dictates, okay, who do you want to include in the process? Because there's different types of buyers.
One of the other things I run into, and I'd be interested in how you guys might look at this, people tend to get fixated on a part of something. It's like the multiple. What was the multiple? And I've seen a lot of situations where people want to be able to brag at the cocktail parties that I got this big number, but then when you look at the terms and conditions and the warrants and the contingency money and escrow, that actually they're 8 turned into a 6 or when you actually talk about the deal, how important are all those structures and all these other things and warranties? I mean, 'cause isn't that a big part of this that people don't think about?
Everyone is different. There are no two that are the same. And I think that, again, it's when does it happen? What does the world look like at that point in time? Jim talked about cycles. Let me give you an example. If you look at the last decade where we've had inflation running at, or GDP growth running at 4% from 2000 to 2011, and from 11 to 15, it's been in essence below 1 or flat. If we forecast going forward and we think about volatility and very slow growth and investments and innovation, all those play into, one, the multiple on one side, but two, the preparation, the risk, if you will. You talk about escrows and a lot of other elements to that. Those factors are different on every deal, and it's different because of the way the company has been run, the end markets that they may participate in, the type of customers that they have. So there's a lot. It's a lot more complicated than a number.
Okay, and it changes based on.
And it absolutely does change.
Jim, what's your take?
Well, and the higher price that a buyer pays, the greater the equity risk of that investment. So at different points in the cycle, a buyer can borrow 3 times to 5 times EBITDA in debt at close. So the remainder of the purchase price is made up in the form of equity. So if I can borrow 5 times debt and I can put in 1 times in equity, then I'm a lot more lenient, on the reps and warranties and indemnification provisions and stuff like that. If I got to pay 10 times to get that same company, and I got to put in 5 turns of EBITDA in equity, I want a lot more protection because I'm taking on a lot more equity risk.
I won't talk about the specific situation, but I had a distributor go to market to go sell a company. Got everything all set, kind of went through the whole thing. I thought the whole deal was great, and then it turned out that the guy had a lien on his inventory from the supplier that he had from 35 years ago. Didn't care about it, didn't matter, but then they couldn't get the debt and the whole thing fell apart. And part of it was his finances weren't that clean. How important are clean financials when you're looking at something like this? Not this audience, but there are some distributors that are kind of happy to have things kind of loose, and they brag about the cash they can get. Does that scare you guys off?
No, look, it's, the tighter the operation you run, the better your chances are to getting that number that, whatever that number is, right, that you referenced, right, in terms of what the expectation is. And again, I think companies that are well-disciplined and well-run tend to be consistent throughout their operations. So they see it in their financing packages, they see it in their inventory, they see it in their receivables. Those are the elements that move around quite a bit once you get past whatever that theoretical number is. And so there's consistency. And when there's inconsistency, you see it in more places, and that's where you get into trouble like you just described. And that's where I think, sellers have to be disciplined and say, we're just not going to do that because it's not good for our shareholders, and we have an obligation to them as well. So that's when those things go the wrong way.
I wouldn't add anything. It's a reflection of the company. Dirty financials are a reflection of the company.
So let's say that I've got a distribution business. My kid wants to be a rock and roll star. Nobody's got interest in the business. And because of the succession stuff Sandy talked about is one of our big challenges, and I haven't done that. I'm a legend in my own mind, and I'm now thinking I need an exit point. So hopefully you don't wait till the very end, but let's say I did that and I'm thinking I want to position myself for a sale in 5 years. So from what you're saying, this consistency in financing, having clean financials is a part of it. What would be the kinds of things, if you guys were sitting on the board of a small distributor looking to sell it, or you owned one, what would you be doing to prepare yourself for that kind of an exit?
Well, I think, the key thing you said in that statement is the 5 years. So on a 5-year plan, the advice we give to every distributor is to build your business as if you're never going to sell it. Invest in the people, invest in the training, invest in the IT systems, invest in the infrastructure, invest in the product lines. If you ask that question, you say a year, from now, I know I'm going to be selling, I believe I'm going to be selling my business. that's a different path. Then you're working on cleaning your financials, get your inventory cleaned up, get your receivables cleaned up, be able to prepare as clean a package as possible for when you go to market. So I think the loaded part of that question is the duration. So if I'm going to, at some point, I know I have no children that are going to come into the business. I know I have no plans to bringing professional management into the business to transition it from me. Then I got to build this organization, and that's going to take time. If I know I'm going to sell this next year, then I got to clean the organization to enhance my odds, as much as possible. About what we talked about earlier.
If I wait till the last minute, people pretty much see through. That's what they call putting lipstick on the pig.
Well, but not cleaning your inventory. Listen, they're not going to. There's no buyer. There's no buyer in the room that's going to pay you for junk inventory that doesn't sell. So you can clean that. Bad accounts receivable that are uncollectible. Everybody in this room knows they have things.
We all do.
That have been around a long time that they can clean up, that they're not going to get value for at the time of the sale. And actually the more junk they have, in the business or on the business can reflect poorly on the business. So there's cleaning it up versus putting lipstick on a pig.
Okay. What's your take in terms of how
I would echo everything that Jim just said, but I would comment on one of the comments that you made around 5 years. I think, and I'll parallel what Sandy said, I think one of the biggest challenges that our industry faces is the speed of change and the adaptation, as Sandy referenced, to change. So in our old world, we would have said 5 years is plenty of time for us to get ourselves ready. That's kind of my horizon. I have a theoretical number. I'll be at a theoretical age. I'll be at this age. I'll get this amount out. What I would suggest is that, to Jim's point, look at that really on a granular basis. How much, if I were going to hold this business, do I have to invest? Who, if I couldn't sell it because I want more than one option, would I hand it off to internally, and would I feel real good about that? And then am I getting the thinking and the training and the next generation ready to go? And I will tell you, I never stop being amazed when I sit down with our trainees who are 20 years old and ask them to look at our business. I'll give you an example. I was with a group about 2 weeks ago, and I said, what do you see when you look into the terminals in terms of customer transactions? And this trainee said, you mean the blue screen of death? That was their response, right? So I said, what do you mean by that? And the way they think and the way they process and the way they move is so much faster than we have historically done. If you think 5 years is a long time for preparation, there's a lot of work in terms of organizational transformation, leadership, technology application, both on the product side and on the system side, to get yourself ready, if you're trying to be in that premium position that you're describing, right? So I would not underestimate that, and I would say it's moving faster, it's requiring more, both from an investment standpoint and a thinking standpoint. And we see that pretty clearly. So 5 years is a long time, but it's going to go by really, really fast because there's a lot of work in that context.
There are a lot of challenges as you go through that, and one of the things that you see in the consulting business, if sales are going like this and earnings are going like this, nobody needs a consultant. It's usually when everything gets stuck. And you find a lot of businesses that owner-operator, the owner of the capital is also the senior executive. They end up with all their net worth tied up in the business. And so they get to a certain age and they get advice from their advisor. You got to get some of your net worth out of the business into your personal estate. And so in a sense, they start squeezing the business. And what both of you said in common goes back to what you said with investment. If I'm going to be preparing the business, I need to be spending money. I'm not squeezing it out. Did I read that right?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, this industry has gotten the benefit of a decade of the Chinese driving copper prices up. I mean, that generated a lot of cash, for this industry. The businesses that took that cash and reinvested it in the business, in IT, in people, in training, and all the things that go to creating a sustainable organization, they're going to be around, for the long haul. And they're going to be, they'll be able to make their own decision as to whether they're, a buy or sell. The folks that just took that cash and didn't reinvest it in the business, there's going to be another wave of, consolidation coming, because you're not going to out Amazon, you know, as Sandy said, you got to constantly reinvest in your businesses.